All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio. And our first guest today comes from Truthout. It's Jason Leopold. DHS turns over Occupy Wall Street documents to Truthout. Really? Why would they even bother? What were you going to do about it? Welcome back to the show. Sorry,
hey,
I'm always surprised when the government complies with some demand of a citizen.
Well, I have to say, Scott, it's I filed probably about nearly 100 FOIA requests last year. Much of that has to do with issues revolving around national security, counterterrorism, torture, etc. I haven't really received much, and in fact, I'm still waiting for some of those to be processed. So I was quite surprised that DHS, Department of Homeland Security, turned over the first batch of documents, which total about 400 pages related to Occupy Wall Street. And there's a lot of interesting, important information in there. And I just want to note that in a few weeks they're scheduling another release of documents. So they actually have quite a bit of information. Their info is redacted throughout these documents, but
so what, are they following some acolytes of the blind sheikh around, making sure that they don't hurt the American peaceful protesters?
Yeah, well, these it leaves no question, put it this way, that Department of Homeland Security was closely monitoring Occupy Wall Street, the movement from the very first day that it started. There were threat assessments in there. There was even some reports from the Secret Service. The Secret Service monitored the first protest on September 17th and put together a little case summary. There is information that in there showing that there was some activity happening in Pittsburgh, in which they put a threat assessment together there. What's very interesting is that there's actually some people within the Department of Homeland Security who were skittish about what the agency was doing with regard to Occupy Wall Street, and verbalized their concern by stating that they feared that some of these actions rose to the level of unauthorized surveillance. Many of the fusion centers, felt that, they needed intelligence or wanted intelligence. Fusion centers, which were scattered throughout the country. So they would, send notes or emails to, headquarters asking for, quote, intelligence products, on Occupy Wall Street. And I will say that, some of the more top, senior officials, within the agency said, look, we're not supposed to do this. This is not our job. So when you get requests like this from fusion centers, you just tell them that, no, this is a local law enforcement matter. So there's, you could see within the documents that they struggled. What's very interesting, though, first let me just point out what's also very important is statements to the media that are in these documents are carefully worded. One of the most important for the people who have been monitoring Occupy Wall Street, one of their most important pieces of information for them was to find out whether the agency was involved in that crackdown that took place in October. What appeared to be a coordinated crackdown of Occupy encampments and the protests throughout the country. There was, I think, within a dozen or so cities. And it was very, very violent, if you recall. And so people speculated that this had to be coordinated with the Department of Homeland Security.
Right.
So the documents say that, first let me just point out there's no smoking gun in the documents that say, or that shows that the agency was involved in that. But there are more documents to come, so who knows? But it does, show that Federal Protective Service was on the scene. And many of these protests, they were, the documents say the only The only one that they were involved in was...
What the hell is the Federal Protective Services? I've never even heard of that one, I don't think.
Yeah, it's, the vehicles that you see, or that if you've heard that there's any vehicles out there with Department of Homeland Security, it's basically, they're the folks that monitor, what takes place on, if there's anything that's happening on federal property, federal...
They're security for government buildings, basically.
Exactly.
Okay, exactly. I got
you. So, they're part of the agency, and the other thing that these documents show, Scott, is that it's such a Department of Homeland Security. What a massive bureaucracy, massive. The fact that you have so many different offices within this agency that some people don't know, frankly, what their job is. What they're supposed to do. The Department of Homeland Security is supposed to monitor threats, threats to the homeland. That's basically what it says on their website. There are some people that felt like, hey, look, there's a protest happening. There's a movement that's being organized, and we should have intelligence on them, and we should be able to do that. And as I indicated, that they're not supposed to do that, but some within the agency felt that they are. And then you get to the point where you, in these documents, where you have the media contacting the agency to find out what their role was within this crackdown. And, these spokespeople at the agency, have no idea. So, they're sending notes back and forth to higher ups and saying, well, how would we describe our activities with Occupy Wall Street? They're getting the responses and giving the media carefully worded statements and misleading them a bit, providing information on background, and then later you see that that these reporters, simply published it wholesale.
Well, can you share with us a little bit more specifically some of those statements?
Sure. It's, there were some inquiries that, right around November, there were inquiries that they received from CBS, Associated Press, AP, Reuters, and I'm just, bringing this up on the documents. And again, these inquiries were, what does, is the Department of Homeland Security involved in the crackdown? And then, the spokespeople would write to their bosses or the higher ups and basically say, what should we say? And these statements said, the Department of Homeland Security is not involved in any coordinated crackdown with Occupy Wall Street. If anything takes place on federal land, and then only to ensure the safety of individuals, then that's when we will step in. But we leave this as a law enforcement matter. And then on background, law enforcement meaning local law enforcement, and then on background, they would provide the reporters with information. Federal Protective Services was involved in only one crackdown, and that was in Portland. And because something took place on federal property there. And
well, that's that annoying bumper music coming in here. We got to go out and take this break, but we'll be right back on the other side with Jason Leopold from Truthout.org. He got a giant pile of Homeland Security documents through the Freedom of Information Act, all about their surveillance of the Occupy Wall Street protest movement. We'll be right back. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. Got Jason Leopold on the line from Truthout.org. The article is DHS turns over Occupy Wall Street documents to Truthout, and there's a link to the actual files right there at the top of the page for you. And go write your own article all about it if you want. It has a flavor of being continually updated as we learn more, as we continue sifting through this thing together. Pretty quick summary of what you have in the documents. Where were we when the music started playing?
This was it's being updated regularly, and we're putting out some separate reports as well. And, we were talking about, what some of these statements were,
right.
To the media. And, internally, what some of the DHS officials told at least the public affairs office was, when these calls came into, what are you guys doing? Are you involved with the crackdown? And, one statement here says, quote, "We are working with GSA, General Services Administration, which is the agency that approves permits for protests on federal property. We are working with GSA and each city government to ensure that all parties concerned are safe and secure. DHS has held standard coordination calls and face-to-face meetings with our partners to ensure that the proper resources are available for operations, such as street closures, etc." That, again, what can one take from that statement, which is basically,
it's deniability. Yeah, we were there, but we were doing a different mission than
exactly. Exactly. And then, in one case, and this is again, a carefully worded statement where, specifically, were you DHS involved in the crackdown? And, one of the officials says, this is not taking place in any wholesale manner. So again, it's, reporters would take that, reprint it, and, not really dig into what that means, any wholesale manner. So, it certainly does indicate that something was happening. And, during the protests and many folks were tweeting about these vehicles that they saw. And some of the vehicles, as I indicated, were, Federal Protective Service. Mm-hmm. And nobody knew exactly, why they were there, but these documents indicate now that, well, they were there specifically because they were monitoring the protesters, monitoring the activities, and putting together, as I indicated, threat assessments in some cities, and where Occupy they felt that there was a threat. So it's very interesting to see that this is still taking place. The response has been to some of these revelations. Well, that's what the Department of Homeland Security is supposed to do. Scott, we've spoken about this before. The public seems to be accepting, for the most part, of, hey, this is the way it is. This is what our government does, and they're supposed to, monitor for threats. No, they're not supposed to do that. They're not supposed. Well, at least dissent. This was monitoring, in some cases, to suppress the First Amendment constitutionally protected, rights of these protesters and their First Amendment rights. So,
well, and the government doesn't have any claim on this level of paranoia at all, as though the Occupy Wall Street movement was about to turn into, the riot in Cairo that overthrew Mubarak or something and brings down the U.S. government. Yeah. Like this is the first Red Scare and,
right.
Massive strikes crippling the nation's economy. It's nothing like this at all. It's a protest movement of disaffected Democrats who have good reason to be disaffected, but who are basically up to nothing.
Right.
No offense.
Right, exactly.
No
offense taken. Let me just say
so the cops' job is protecting their rights. That's it. This is America, and so the cops are there to provide security because that's the only excuse they have for existing. Other than that, what is this? Unless they have an Al-Qaeda threat to the poor innocent protesters, why do the feds have any involvement whatsoever?
Well,
so NYPD matter.
Right, yeah. It's true. In fact, I have, filed an open records act request, with NYPD to try to get some of those documents. I actually think that those documents, those materials, whatever they have internally, would be, the materials that are more revelatory in terms of what's happening. And and let me just point out that just about an hour ago, there was a report that came out about NYPD infiltrating, what's what the news organization characterizes as liberal groups. So, these are new revelations that, this activity has been taking place in, within the past couple of years. But
yeah,
again,
I'm sorry. I hope I didn't sound like I was implying local means not corrupt or anything.
No, I don't think you're implying that at all. And I think that in the big picture for me, what's important here, or what I'm interested in, and what I want to impress upon, my readers is that is first of all, the use of the Freedom of Information Act. It's actually a very important tool, and it can be, when used properly, a powerful tool. And as such, I used it in order to, pry loose, information that otherwise may not have been, revealed publicly. So that's important, and it shows what our government is up to and what the taxpayer dollars are being used for. And when we look at all this historically, though, in a historical context, this is nothing new. And, you more or less indicated that. This, first of all, this type of activity monitoring has been going on for decades. It's interesting. One can just go onto the, FBI's website and look at all their old records about, the spying on the anti-war movement. So, this has been taking place for decades. What's interesting again to me now is the massive bureaucracy, this behemoth of a federal agency, the power that they have, the money that they have, the money that they're using and wasting, and to put together these assessments on whether this movement will turn into a threat, when there are obviously perhaps some legitimate, threats out there. So, and I understand that when you have something this size, that you do have to pay attention to it. I think that what was happening here, they were going a little bit. In some cases, some folks were trying to go beyond that. And it's one of the other pieces of information within the documents that stood out to me is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They wanted information as to whether any federal law enforcement officer had confiscated or if they've seen information about whether any of these protesters carried quote Molotov cocktails, guns, knives, unconventional and conventional weapons. They were very interested in that. Obviously, perhaps they can.
Yeah, they just want to get their camel nose into the tent. That's all.
Right, exactly. So, it's all. I think that the whole thing is just, when you look at this in the big picture, should anyone be surprised? No. I think part of the surprise out there is that, or in the documents, is the fact that there was dissent within the agency as to, what they were doing. There were people that actually felt that, they were crossing the line. I will point out, however, that these individuals noted in some of their emails that, quote, they've just learned that the emails and some of the information that they've been disseminating was subject to a FOIA request. So they were very conscious of what they were doing, what they were saying that would eventually become public, or could become public. So, it's worth noting.
Right. Yeah, plant a little exculpatory evidence in there for themselves for later. And Jason Leopold's going to come knocking from Truthout.org.
Right.
All right. Hey, thanks a lot for your time, man. I really appreciate it and your work.
Appreciate it, Scott. Have a great weekend.
You too, man. All right, everybody, that's the great Jason Leopold, Truthout.org. DHS turns over some Occupy Wall Street documents.